Hello, everyone, and welcome to this festive edition of the Franchise Show. And this is the show where we get under the hat of all things franchising. And it's a live show. Well, it's live if it's December the 23rd, 2025, at about 5:15 in the UK and at about 12:15 in bits of America. And because it's live, we love you to get involved in our discussions. So please say hello, pop in a comment, and get involved in these discussions. So what do? Each week on the Franchise Show, we take a new topic and we take a lovely guest. And today is no exception to that. We have a fantastic guest with us. And the topic today is data-driven franchise decisions. And to talk about that, we have the fantastic Jason West McReynolds. Jason, welcome to the Franchise Show.
Hey, welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. It's fantastic to have you with us. Before we get into things today, Jason, perhaps you could give a little introduction to yourself, how you've got into franchising, a little bit about Franmetrics and why data has been so important to you in your journey.
Yeah, I could speak to that. So yeah, I did start working with a franchisor, being part of a franchise group. Our biggest challenge was, finding how to coach franchisees. Like our job was to make sure that they were profitable, ran their business correctly, and we were doing everything kind of knee-jerky. So our thing was, hey, we need to really coach franchisees and use our data and make actually data-driven decisions. That led me to start Franmetrics, where we could collect, benchmark, report data. But I've been in franchising almost 30 years. I'm a certified franchise executive, part of the IFA. So I've been around doing this for quite a while, but really focused as technology progresses on how we can get the best kind of data in the right kind of data to help the performance of each franchise location.
Fantastic. What a great introduction. My goodness, 30 years. You don't look old enough, Jason, to be in franchising for 30 years. You must have been a wee boy when you started.
Almost 30. I'm over 29, but yeah.
Very good. Excellent.
Yeah, I'm getting up there.
Amazing stuff. Look, it's fantastic to hear you talking about coaching franchisees. And, whether you're a franchisee or whether you're a franchisor, making decisions is tough, isn't it? It's a really difficult. Decisions are difficult, and the consequences of making a good or bad decision are quite far-reaching. And I suppose if you're calling upon good data, raw data, without it being contrived or without it being, put into percentage terms or things that perhaps can turn that data into something else. What sort of data do you start to look at when, what's the beginning point when you're looking at a franchise organization to get this data? What sort of things are you looking at?
Yeah, so first of all, it definitely depends on the industry, but the one thing we definitely want to look at is what we call leading indicators. Everybody gets fairly emotional about like, oh, how much cash is in my account? What did we do last night in sales? Or these kind of just pinpoint things that get some kind of emotional reaction. But what we really need to be looking at is the kinds of things that you can do to increase revenue and profitability. And those aren't necessarily the things that people first think of. Like, so leading indicators, for example, would be something like, hey, we spend this much on internet marketing. We get this many visits to our site. We convert those many people into customers. It generates this much revenue. And then you follow that kind of life cycle of return on investment, and you can, instead of looking at just a P&L, which is looking kind of in the rearview mirror, this is what we did, last month or the month before, we can actually find data that will predict what that P&L could be in the future and the performance of that. So it's really combining the leading indicators and the lagging indicators, tracking the results, and then reinforcing that through the system.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you said there, actually, particularly about a P&L being a rear view mirror. I hadn't quite heard that as an expression, but I think it's very relevant, actually, because that's exactly what it is. You're looking back in the past. And sometimes with the way auditing and accounting is done, you're looking back quite a long way in the past with that P&L. It could be a couple of years that reported P&L, is being put on there. Let's welcome a few people before we can continue our discussion today. We've got Johnny Joseph with us. Johnny is an auditor, a franchise auditor. And he's been on the show before. He's put fellow franchise friends, greetings from a soon to be very rainy Los Angeles. It's normally sunny, Johnny. What have you done with the sun over there in Los Angeles? But it's great to have you with us. We have the fantastic Simon Wise with us. Simon is a franchise recruiter here in the UK. So if you are looking for your next top talent in your business here in the UK, then please reach out to Simon. He's put hello, franchise friends. And here we go. It's Joe Caruso, and he's going to make me try and pronounce some of the places where he lives. This is becoming a weekly thing, so I'm going to give it a go. I know you know Joe very well. Joe has put afternoon, Jason West McReynolds, CFE. Let's give you your full title. And Harvey Tuck, listening from Havre de Grace. MD in my bunker. We'll ask more about that. High above the Susquehanna River in the Chesapeake Bay, advising franchisors the world over. There you go. I expect a score now, Joe, out of 10, how I did with the pronunciation of the place that you live, which sounds amazing, by the way. But fantastic to have you with us, Joe. Joe is a huge resource for franchising in America. I would encourage anybody who's looking to get involved in franchising in America to reach out to Joe. He's a lovely chap, and he is excellent. So who else have we got? Johnny has put in a question, so we are going to definitely come to that question in a minute. And let's welcome a couple more people. We've got Randy House with us. Oh, wow. Great to see you, Randy. He's put long time no see, Harvey. Yes, it is. And it's fantastic to have you here. So everybody who's here, please pop in I've just seen Joe's comment coming. And 7 point, it's not bad, actually. It's not bad. Let's quickly put that up here, actually. Joe's given me a 7.9. I think last week it was 7.5. So, we're talking about data, aren't we?
Are you going to track that? I was going to ask, did you put that in your scorecard and let's see if you can improve that over time?
Well, that's it. It is improving. So look, here we go. The data is proving things here. We have the lovely Penny Hopkinson with us. Penny is, of course, one of our fantastic supporters. She is an expert on ops manuals. I've been a big supporter of hers, bought her book many, many years ago. Here it is. Is it the right way round? Yes, it is. Now, if you want to get your ops manuals the right way round, then please speak to Penny, because she's lovely and she's a great expert on ops manuals. And she has turned those ops manuals into some AI wizardry. Please scan that QR code and chat to Penny about that. Now, Penny has put, hello, Harvey, Johnny, all franchise friends. Season's greetings to all. Oh, season's greetings to you as well, Penny. So let's have a little look. Okay, let's get back to this question here from Johnny. So Johnny has put, Jason, in your experience, are many franchisors using data analytics sufficiently to evaluate the reasonableness of the sales and royalties being reported by franchisees? Yeah, I mean, look, you spoke, Jason, a little bit there about revenue, as being one of these key leading indicators, and royalties are often very closely connected to revenue. How do you respond to this question here from Johnny?
Well, this will also definitely be industry specific, but there's a few places where franchisors validate the revenue reported by their franchisees, because this is something that, well, depending on the culture within the franchise, that you either figure it's reliable or it isn't. And I can tell you, there's anybody in franchising knows that that can change drastically between each franchisor. But there are some things that are red flags and might trigger an audit of a franchisee from a franchisor. First of all, knowing cost of goods sold. If you're a restaurant per se, you usually have the information of what the franchise has purchased and what they spent and how much they've went through it. If I'm a pizza place, I know how many pizza boxes they went through. I know how much they sold. I think that would be a really good indication of what the revenue is. Also, POS data, you should, if you're mandating and you have access to a POS system, you should know exactly what they went through, what they charged, they're voiding tickets. There's all these little red flag indicators. It's one of those things that I don't think franchisors should have a lot of stress about, though. If that's your focus, worried about if I'm getting my revenue, like it's, the culture, there's something wrong already. It's an indication of another problem. Not saying you shouldn't be looking, but it shouldn't, I mean, if you're proactively worried about it every day, looking, digging through reports and receipts, like that should be something that, like, this KPI triggered, I'll look into it now, and then react to it. It shouldn't be something, in my opinion, that's like, if you're constantly thinking franchisees are trying to not pay the royalties, you have a relationship problem way beyond that. There's something there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, actually, because, royalties in terms of financials are incredibly important for a franchisor, just as revenue and profit is incredibly important for a franchisee and the franchisor. But actually, I really like the way that you've taken that to mean that actually, if that's what your focus is, then there's a cultural problem. I think you're absolutely right.
No doubt.
Yeah, sorry, go on, please.
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing that, and I've talked to new franchisors going into it, that was the bigger focus than, like, how do I make sure that my franchisees are successful? What if they're trying to steal from me? I just know that permeates throughout the whole. I mean, everybody's looking from the bottom up for a culture, and now you're going to basically, make them want to take from you when your focus as a franchisor is that, then their focus is going to be like, well, they're more worried about themselves than me. So I don't know. I think it's important, though. And by the way, even in a good cultured system, you could have a bad apple. They need to be rooted out, and you need to take that action. So I'm not suggesting that isn't important to understand and to be concerned about. But I also think there's ways to, and it's, yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Johnny. Great question. Thanks for popping that in. And please, everybody who's here live, put in any questions about data that you want us to discuss about. It's always great to get your takes on this. Let's have a look at a couple more comments here. Joe has put, with lessons, I can reliably coach Harvey to a solid 8.5. Well, there you go. That's my aim. When Joe gives me an 8.5 for my pronunciation, then I am winning. Love that. Welcome to Steve Barrett. I had a good chat with Steve Barrett the other day. Great franchise resource here in the UK. He's put, love the point on P&Ls being like looking in the rear view mirror. I agree. I think that's a really powerful statement you made there, Jason, because a lot of people take the past and assume that is going to be useful for predicting the future. But of course, that's not always the way. A data-driven approach shows the levers that can be pulled. Yeah, this is an interesting one. What do you make of this one, Jason? When you're looking at different data points, is that allowing you to pull a different lever? You've got a business, you look at costs of goods, or you look at other, maybe profitability, and then you're pulling a particular lever, and I guess it's going to be different for different businesses, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and when a franchisor gets to a certain size, they have a wealth of data, and that's where that's where their sophistication has to pick up, because you're going to track, look, we did this kind of marketing, or we did this kind of campaign, or our food cost or our cost of goods sold or labor is higher or lower in these types of markets with this type of demographics. And then we can create benchmarks and results and trends based on basically the situation the franchise is in. Like if you open, I always say, if you open a bar on this, on the beach in Miami, doesn't mean it's going to work in the middle of the country. And franchisors, as they grow, think they've solved some cute, puzzle for a profitability, and then they go into different markets with different income levels, or just different buying habits, or different costs, and reacts to marketing differently. So you need to create goals and benchmarks based on the area and within basically the situation that the franchisee is in. And and then yes, you can change it, because you can change based on what's working, what's not working, and why. And then of course communication and the coaching goes to that piece. But yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Great point, Steve. Thanks for popping in that comment. Again, anybody who is listening, please get involved, put in your questions, get involved in this. What's been your experience of how you've used data in your organizations? What has been your positive and your negative experiences of that? Let's quickly look at Johnny. Johnny's put royalties are the lifeblood of a franchise, needs to be managed and monitored. That's just good business practice, not paranoia. In my humble opinion, just curious if data is being used sufficiently to assist with.
I realized I didn't actually answer his question. The question is no, they don't, because he's not wrong. And Johnny asked if franchises were actually doing it at a significant basis, and they're not. They could. So I have, we have a bunch of clients, and I would say maybe less than 20% are actually using the data that we collect to verify royalties. It's not hard to do. That's the thing. And I said you shouldn't be driven by paranoia, but I also believe you should be doing it. So, but more should be doing it. Yeah, absolutely. They're not doing it, and they should be. Some are, but it's very few in my experience, and it's not difficult. It really isn't. I mean, and you investigate further, and then if you keep going down that rabbit hole, you got to do it. You got to pursue that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, look, thanks again, Johnny, for your comments. Simon's put, how do you manage and organize your data to enable you to make the right decisions? Well, look, it's a great question. And this is, I think, what we're trying to get to here. Take this from a couple of perspectives. Maybe we can use a few. But let's first of all start talking about a franchisor. And let's talk about, let's talk about a QSR or a food-based franchise, right? Because I think it's going to be useful to try and picture a business in our minds when we're looking at this, okay? So we've got a QSR business, and let's say they've got, I was going to say they're relatively well established and they've got 50 sites, but that's in the UK. So let's put a 0 on that for the US. But look, how do you do that? You've got this QSR. How do you manage this data? Like you said earlier, that when these businesses start to build up momentum, they get a wealth of data. What do they do with all of this?
Well, yeah. And one of my first terms I've learned in business, way before I even did anything and got into franchising when I was very young, the person I learned business from, the first thing he said is, when you're in a small business, you could suffer from paralysis by analysis, meaning you're just sitting there looking at numbers and numbers and numbers. On a unit level, QSR business, You really need to focus on a handful of metrics that move the needle. That's why I'm really not even that big on sitting there and looking at line items in a P&L. So imagine we're looking at the P&L and you have like some expense for $50. That's not going to move the needle. And the font size is the same thing as labor, right? Which should be looked at as a percentage of revenue anyway. So even on the P&L, that's not telling you anything. And then there's rent, which might be big, but what are you going to do? Not pay rent? Is a franchisor going to tell a franchisee not to pay rent? So think about all those things I just said about a P&L that makes all those numbers useless. Not useless per se, but not actionable and maybe not the most important. What we do and what Franmetrics does and others, so I'm not just going to promote myself, is scorecarding. We'd love to scorecard. Put the most important KPIs, the most actionable, important KPIs. Don't overwhelm the report, and benchmark on similar type locations. So you can compare your results in the format they are, if they're a percentage of revenue or a fixed number, whatever. So you can see where you're at, where franchisees of the similar nature are at, and where you could use some improvement. And that's also where coaches can help say, here, look at this is a franchise as you operate, what they're doing, the median result, you're below just raise this, and then you might be able to predict some outcomes if you're able to change that. And so, that's probably oversimplification. There's other reporting and other things you would look into. And of course, sometimes you got to get in the weeds once you see the problem, but that's how you do it. You collect and share the data back. And then on a more technical level, everything connects through APIs these days. So the POS system, the P&L statements, Google reviews, you can pull that stuff instantly into any application and do the stuff I'm talking about and automate it. So from a technical aspect, there is no way you can't get it done and automate it. Like, copying, pasting numbers onto a spreadsheet, you're going to outgrow that in about 5 to 10 units. It's not how it should be done.
No, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about benchmarking, right? Because it doesn't matter what franchise business that you've got out there. If you're thinking about data, you're comparing data to something else, for a measure of success to see how you're doing against your network. When you're thinking about benchmarking a particular franchisee, where do you set that benchmark? If you've got a network of 100 franchisees, of which 20% are excelling, you've got 60% that are in the middle, and you've got, whatever else is left, 20%, I think, I can't remember what I said now, that are not doing so well. In terms of that benchmark, where do you normally set that? Is it somewhere in the middle?
It really depends on where the KPI is, to be honest. And, some KPIs will change based on time in operation, right? Some will change, like I said at the beginning, on the region. Like if I'm tracking labor and I'm in California, and anybody in California knows your labor is going to be 10% higher than anywhere else in the country. So I'm really looking to say, I always look at from the franchisee coming back saying, hey, I didn't hit that because of this, or because I'm this way, or because I'm that way. This is special to me. So it's always about that cohorting. But no, I always want to tell them the network and then the ones that are more similar to them. And it could be revenue. It could be based on revenue groupings, right? Or service offerings. But, revenue itself is benchmarkable based on how long you've been operating and what services or goods you're offering. So and I think it's really important to just do this is the average or median result, and that's going to engage the franchisees more because they're comparing to their peers as opposed to just another franchisor telling them what they ought to be doing and what they ought to have as a result. In other words, it's not just pulled out of your pocket and said, oh, your labor sucks. No, your labor, this is the median. This is what it should be. This is what would happen if you got it as opposed to your own. This is how much more money you would make. We're rolling in the same direction instead of just another criticism. So I know that's kind of a tangent there, but it's kind of an important one because getting them to the data is as important as having the data. Having the data is one thing. That's another thing I will say. This is one of the biggest mistakes franchisors make when they start franchising. And I've seen it and lived it, is that they go into this and train their franchisees how to give good service to the customer, how to make the product, how to pay royalties, all the operational stuff. The actual business acumen of franchisees, especially ones coming outside of business, is about zero. They probably never balanced a checkbook, let alone understanding this kind of like how to understand sophisticated data, let alone read a P&L, anything. They don't train on basic financial principles. They don't know what an asset is. They don't know this stuff. I've seen it's an epidemic. I've worked with 300 location franchise systems that completely forgot to train their franchisees anything. They didn't even do bookkeeping. They weren't like, there was franchisees didn't know bookkeeping or know what it was or knew it needed to be done until taxes came up. So they weren't getting any data to work off of. And that's kind of like there's an epidemic of franchising. And of course, not every system's the same, but my biggest point is this is all great at this level, but franchisors really need to understand that when they're training franchisees on everything else, that this gets missed and it should not be missed. It's super important. It could be the difference between failing and succeeding.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is. And I think that that's here as well, that there's this gap in a skill set in terms of understanding those basic financial principles, some of those basic numbers. Franchising is all about teaching that system, that proven system, but it misses that bit out. And it's a big chunk of it. And I think it's absolutely the same here. I was speaking with somebody at I think it was the American Franchise Academy, Alicia, I think, Aisha. Anyway, look, she teaches that bit of it to franchisors, and I think it's really, really relevant to have some basic business teachings,
right,
for a franchisee to be successful. You've
everybody's so passionate and excited about what they're doing. And franchisors have usually been in business for a long time and figured the stuff out to some sort. They're so much more sophisticated, and they forget that franchisees aren't necessarily. I'm not going to say in every case, but yeah, it's you would be shocked at what I've seen in some systems about how they literally just show up to work and then hope everything works out. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Randy has put, Merry Christmas, be safe, great informative chat. Randy's put that in a way that comment is really high and short. I like that. I don't know how you've done that, Randy, but it's very good. You've nearly hidden Jason. He's having to poke out behind that comment. Great to have you with us, though. Let's have a quick look at one here from Joe. Joe has put, my view, Jason Harvey is relatable franchisee, full P&L reporting with standard chart of account, ideally on an unified reporting platform, will be table stakes for franchisors, and those who ignore this are doing so at their peril. Yeah, absolutely. There's some numbers in this that are just so vital to things. What do you make of this? We spoke about P&Ls being this sort of view of the past. Is there anything you can take from a P&L? What data can you take that is useful, and how do you?
Yeah, and to suggest that my bigger point was that is that those things have happened. It doesn't mean you can't learn. Like, of course, if you're in the food business and your labor is too high and people are clocking on too early every day, like that's actionable. So things are actionable, even though it's in the rearview mirror. So my thing is the P&L by itself. You're missing a lot of stuff. Yeah. So absolutely. And what Joe mentioned about having a consistent chart of accounts is a major thing as well. It's a big lift for franchisors and hard to mandate. And listen, like when I started in franchising, probably the success rate of even collecting a P&L was about 10%. So getting into the like, hey, you need to use, QuickBooks, and you have to have this chart of account, and you have to use this system to collect it, and you have to or sometimes you have to use a bookkeeper that we dictate, like it's hard to steer these big ships like this, but with technology, these things have become much easier. And if you're going to have, really solid financial performance representations in your disclosure documents, franchisors need this data too. So as much as we want to talk about data-driven decisions, when we're talking about P&Ls, it's also more than just that. You really need to be able to collect and know systematically. And by the way, how are you going to know how profitable your franchisees are if you don't have the full P&Ls with the correct chart of accounts? Because if they don't have the right chart of accounts, you may not know what's owner discretionary costs versus like actual business operating costs. If they're fast and loose with their business card with meals and traveling and whatever, their car payment, then you don't really know, right? And so having a place for the franchisees to put those without saying you can't do that, at least you can isolate the costs that are actually related to the business, and you can put those in your disclosure documents. So anyway,
yeah, absolutely. I think you made some really interesting points. I mean, particularly about the fact that there are not many franchisees that are offering a P&L to the franchisor. And I think that is a problem. I think it's certainly a problem in some businesses here in the UK, reporting back that data, to know how profitable your franchisees are, just because it's their own businesses, of course, but to have that data, you can help them as a franchisor, you can help those franchisees if that's not looking right. Because like you said, that just because the P&L is a rearview mirror, it's still actionable. So if there are some concerns, if there are some issues on there, you can still help them. And of course, it helps you with getting new franchisees. And in America, you have an FDD, you have an item 19, you have some financial disclosures there. But it helps. We're talking about data-driven decisions here. As a potential franchisee, looking at that data as to how profitable a network is really important. We're going to get on in a minute, I think, to how we perceive some of that data, how we transcribe or translate it into things that people can look at to make those decisions. But if you have just joined us today, this is the Franchise Show, and today we are talking about data-driven decisions with the lovely Jason West McReynolds. It's been a fantastic conversation so far. I'd like to welcome a few people who registered to attend the show today. We've been talking a little bit today, actually, about restaurant businesses, and there's quite a few QSRs and restaurant businesses that have joined us. I'd like to welcome Tom Corrigan from Chicken Cottage, Roshan from German Doner Kebab. I'd like to welcome Simon Hopper from Chaiwala, Noah McAllister from Wingstop. We've got quite a few people from Wendy's. I'd like to welcome Dwayne, Stephen, and Joseph from Wendy's. We have Jerry Workman from Bojangles, Rich Jinks from Chopstick. Let's do a couple more, and then we're going to get back into this. We've got Chris Posey from Barrel House and Ghost Chicken. And finally, Lalit from KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. He's a franchisee. So fantastic to have you all with us. Please get involved in today's conversation. Let's just have a quick look at the comments. We've got a couple more coming in here from Steve and from Joe. But before we get on to those two comments, I was speaking to you, Jason, just now about the fact that how do we interpret, let's say, if you had, I'm going to give you an example. If you had one franchisee in your network and then the next year you got another one, you've doubled the amount of franchisees you've got, you've increased by 100%, etc., etc. Right. So how do we transparently use data to put out information as a franchisor to make sure a franchisee is looking at that and making the right decision? Do you think that there's some dangers of converting? I use some silly and obvious examples there, but do you think there's some dangers in converting some of this data in a way that it seems better than it really is?
Well, well, first of all, if you're talking about coaching, I think there's less dangers. If you're talking about disclosures and what you're doing to try to sell prospective franchisees, you get in a real dilemma. You want to set realistic expectations. That's what the FDD is for, not setting skewed or overly optimistic. Or just because somebody could do it doesn't mean they're going to do it, especially if you only have a handful of locations. Now, it's hard to say from 1 to 2. That's not a good enough group. But if you're going from 10 to 20, I think you hopefully can see what kind of things that were done and at what points, and then what were the results at certain times. Week by week is important when you're just starting, right? Like a month waiting for a P&L when you first open your business to find out what you need to be doing is too late. So that's where we talk about a lot of these leading indicators is like, when I open my business, how much marketing do I need to do to get enough customers, enough butts in the seat to actually launch this off here? Because I got to pay that rent. I got to pay all these things. Like, what do I need? And keep in mind, a lot of new businesses, they remember to buy the equipment and hire the employees. They forget to buy their customers. And so which is marketing, right? Everybody thinks marketing is an expense. No, it's not. It's an investment on future revenue if it's done right and predictable, right? So you put this much in, you're going to get this much out. That's called an investment. And tracking those kinds of things based on the performance and making the adjustments should actually make those next locations go better, right? So yeah, using those predictive analytics, what I like to call them, leading indicators, and making those tweaks, analyzing it, and then some is coaching, some is just like, hey, we know where we're going to use our marketing fund. We're going to make sure this is done the right way, and that you have enough of those customers. And then you get the customers and the P&L and so forth. But yeah, it's super, super important to know the kind of the runway of a new franchise. And then, and so it's very, very, very important to compare locations based on time and operation and what you need to do to get them off the ground.
I love that expression that you forget to buy your customers.
You do.
I think that's a really powerful statement, actually, because as much as it made me laugh a little bit, it's that is what marketing is. You're buying your customers' attention, you're buying their loyalty, and you're investing in that to make them your customers. And it's really easy to remember if you're a QSR business. It's easy to remember to buy a grill to cook your burgers on. Right? You're not going to forget that one easily. But you open your doors and expect your customers to arrive. If you put a sort of semicircle of balloons outside, it's a lot more than that,
That's why underfunded franchisees, like, that's the last thing they'll spend their money on, right? Because it's the last thing you spend. So franchisor will say, oh, you don't quite have enough, but we'll let you, and then they have some extra expenses and they're like, well, you should be spending, 20, 15 grand on your opening marketing. Well, I only have 2,000 left. Well, and so you think you've got enough to be open, but you don't, because you got to pay all those overheads regardless, so it's great for you.
We've got a couple of comments here, one from Steve and one from Joe. Let's have a look at these before we're getting quite close to the end of the first section of today's show. So Steve has put, focusing on every metric is the same as focusing on nothing.
So true.
This is really, really good. Love this comment. A balanced scorecard drives relevant focus. Really love this comment. What do you make of this one, Jason?
Well, yeah, I mean, it reminds me of a quote I heard in the book, Traction, or no, it might have been, shoot, it doesn't matter. But anyway, it's, if everything's important, nothing's important.
Yeah.
And it's such a true, yeah, if everything's important, nothing's important. And so that's basically the same way of saying that. And really, it's a matter of what your focus is. And so, I mean, it's really hard to sometimes pin down, but when you're making your scorecards and you're making your, like, these are our top level KPIs, they do have to correlate to what your brand promises and what your, what you want your culture, and like things, some things are more important than others in business. How do we get our KPI? So if you say, hey, service is our number one thing, our number one thing is going to be our net promoter score, or our Google review score, or our customer engagement score. There's all kinds of KPIs that can track how you're taking care of your customer. If it's quality, then it's going to be, then operation, whatever. So absolutely, Steve, thanks for bringing that up. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, me too. Love that. Thanks, Steve. We've got a couple more here from Joe. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. So let's have a look at the first one that Joe's put. Joe has put, many franchise concepts are not proven. They are evolving at best, and others are underdeveloped. This is a great comment, Joe. And this actually reminded me about something that I wanted to ask you, Jason, actually. When we're talking about data, and when we're talking about a relatively mature franchise business, we've got lots of data to pull upon. Lots of franchisees, lots of time that the businesses have been doing this. But how do you approach data with a new franchise business? What when there's very little data, do you look at similar organizations? Is that a way to use data for those franchisors to make good decisions at the beginning?
Well, if somebody's going into franchising with, 4 or 5 locations, company owned, they should have some of the basic stuff figured out. And I'm not saying that means they're proven to be franchising. Some systems know how to make money for themselves, but not for their franchisees. You need franchisees to get data from over time. You have to, this is more of, not necessarily about.
Jason appears to have disappeared there. Just give me a moment. We're getting back. Classic. You see this because it's live. Oh, there he is.
Anyway, the thing is, those first franchisees, the franchisors got to invest a ton of extra effort and time to make sure they're successful because they don't know the numbers. And so, fortunately, because it's not proven, I'm not suggesting that the franchise, that you got to start somewhere. And the first ones you're going to be watching like a hawk, and you're going to probably definitely be investing a ton of time helping them out, above and beyond some of this stuff, because you need at least a handful before you're actually going to get any good benchmarking data.
I think you're right, and I think probably there's a point to be made here that data analysis, however you are doing that, needs to evolve. It needs to be malleable. It needs to be constantly fed with data. Yes, if you've got 4 or 5 locations and you're trying to base your decisions and your advice and how you're growing your business on those 4 or 5, it's likely to be very different if you had then 40 or 50, right?
Oh,
because
yeah.
You've got better, the more data you've got, the better, I think, perhaps. I don't know if you would agree with that.
It is better. More information is always better than less. There's no argument there. But how you share it, what you share, how you're calculating it. I mean, you can roll up a bunch of numbers into another number, if that makes sense. So you could have like hey, customer service score from 1 to 10 that calculates 10 other metrics somewhere else. So we're getting a better, we're not getting a biased or something that's one way or another, or could have some kind of performance based on where you're at. So more is better. When we're presenting it to the franchisees, more isn't better. But the data we're collecting, the raw data, isn't the reporting data, right? We always call things, even in our system, we call them data points. which is the data we pull in, and then the KPIs are the things we actually show in the reports. Data points are the massive amounts of data that we're collecting, and then KPIs are calculated from those data points. And again, like labor is not good as a fixed cost, as a fixed number in most companies. It's as a percentage of revenue. If I'm benchmarking labor against everybody, who's going to have the worst labor? The busiest location that probably makes the most amount of money because they have to hire more people. So why would you look at that as that's pretty basic. Anybody in here at restaurants, it's like, yeah, that's no kidding. But that's why but it kind of says the problem. We need revenue, we need other stuff in that calculation, and we got to show it as a percent.
Absolutely. We are very close to getting to the last part of today's show. Let's quickly move to a comment that Joe's put here. Good point. Predictive analytic KPIs are important and they should be reasonably disclosed. In the US, that's in the item 19 FPR before the franchise is sold. Absolutely. I mean, I've touched on franchise regulation, FDDs, item 19s many times on this show, the good and the bad of all of these things, but great point. Joe, let's finally go on to, I'm not sure who this is, but LinkedIn user has put very informative chat. I have to hop off, unfortunately. Wish you all a Merry Christmas. Well, Merry Christmas to you as well. Right, so we have now come to the end of the first part of today's show. This is the point where, of course, my screen will go black for a little bit. Now, that's not because my camera is broken. It's because you're not allowed to see me without wearing a hat. So this hat is, of course, brought to you by PJ Murphy and Sons, bespoke British hatters. It's actually my good friend Paul Murphy, and he made this hat for me. So if you'd like a beauty like this, please scan that QR code and get involved in the hat wearing antics. Anyway, so this part of the show is where we stop talking about data and franchising for a little bit, and we find out a little bit about Jason. It's also the part of the show where he gets to get his own back on me and ask me any question he likes, and I genuinely don't know what this is going to be. So before we get into that, so let's ask you a question, Jason. I normally start with a bit of a fun one. We may change this up next year, but this is the last one of 2025. So have you met anyone famous? Have you got a claim to fame? Or have you got some sort of crazy hobby we need to know about? Pick any of those.
Well, I will say this. My stepmother, who's still my stepmother, been my stepmother my whole life, actually dated Steve Perry, lead singer of Journey, all through high school. Wow. Went through his shows in bars when she was like 16, 17, all through high school. And so I got it backstage when he went to concert and all that stuff. So I guess that's my person.
That's incredible. Wow. And what was that like? That must have been amazing.
Oh yeah. And the crazy thing is, I listened to Journey and Steve Perry before. She never even mentioned this until I was like 17, 18. And I listened to the music and she never said anything. She just didn't even matter to her. And it was kind of like, what? Like, how's did not say that? Oh yeah, I still talk to his mom. I was like, are you kidding me?
Wow. Oh, I love that. And I love the fact that she did, like you say, she didn't even mention it. Like it wasn't, it's not a big thing. Incredible.
Oh, she didn't want to make my dad jealous, who was also named Steve. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. Well, look, I promised you that you could get your own back on me. Now you can let me get away with this. No one has so far in 2025, but I'm always hoping I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. You don't have to ask, but you can now ask me any question you like.
It's not a gotcha. I really want to know how you broke into from UK into the US franchising. You're everywhere. I'm really impressed. I've been a guest on this show a bunch, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I just kind of curious how you went from UK to you're very informed, and I love it. So I just kind of want to know what was your first step in this, getting into franchising international as opposed to just where you're at.
Well, I think it was, if I'm honest, I think it was probably not massively planned. Um, I think it was the values originally of this show to be audience first, guest second, and me third. And it was about trying to add value to a community. And I always saw franchising evolving from the US, and that we had lots to learn from the US. So I always tried to connect to people in the US, and to take the good from what we all do in franchising. So I think it was partly intentional, partly accidental. That and I think there's a lot of similarities between our countries. You know, we're a tiny country who's relatively new to franchising. So I think it's great to have these discussions. And I always set, I mean, Jason and I were talking about the time this goes out, and I always chose the time to work for the US, so that it was 9 or 10 in the morning now, Pacific time. It's 1 in the afternoon Eastern, and of course it's 6 p.m. here in the UK. So, you know, there's big parts of the world, unfortunately, it's the middle of the night or very early in the morning. That's because we live on a globe. But yeah, love that question. And I hope it does continue these conversations to appeal to anybody in the world of franchising. It's an industry I love. So great question. Thanks, Jason. We have now come to the end of today's show. So it just leaves me, first of all, to thank everybody who has been here live today, everybody who watches this in the future. You are what makes this show special. And it's a big thank you to you all. I'd also like to wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, happy holidays and festivities, whatever you choose to do. This is the last one of 2025. We will be back on the 6th of January. And actually, we're going to be talking about data again, with the lovely Lauren Leclerc from Smappen and Ryan White, who is a franchisor from We Love Pets here in the UK. So please join us for that very first one, Tuesday, 6th of January, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. And finally, I'd like to thank the fantastic Jason. You've been brilliant today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Same here. Thank you for having me. Great conversation. I'll be there on your next show as a guest. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. And until next year now, take very good care.